people saying, oh my gosh, you put up a plaque. That's why I say double the size of it when you guys put it up.
I am running out of time, but I just want to say thank you. I want to say thank you for your voice and for your courage and for your commitment to this country. We must work and be as steadfast as possible in fighting against the rationalization, the socialization, and the legitimization of political violence and terror, and you are a warrior in that space. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin, for 3 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Adam Kinzinger, you're a great American patriot. It was such an honor serving with you on the January 6th Select Committee under Chairman Thompson. You were the only member of the committee who flew himself to work. And there's always an air hangar for you in the Free State where you need a place to land. I wonder, you were, among other things, an officer in the Air National Guard. I wonder if you've had an opportunity to reflect on January 6th and the National Guard and what happened there. What was the standard set by Donald Trump on the threshold for activating the National Guard, because he was unilaterally on top of the DC National Guard, so he could have sent it at any point and decided not to, even when you had thousands of people in a violent mob storming the Capitol, driving the members out of the House and the Senate. Is that a standard that you think he has maintained in his new administration in terms of deployments to places like Los Angeles and Chicago?
Look, it's interesting because I was an active guardsman during January 6th, and I remember the whole time, like, just where's the National Guard, right? My people. And I remember actually when I left after we reconvened and voted, I saw my first Guard soldiers, and that was very emotional for me. And in a good and bad way, it was good because it's like I'm proud of them. It was bad because, like, why, they're here. If you guys remember, after that day, my fellow Republicans tried this conspiracy theory that it was either Speaker Pelosi or the mayor of D.C. who was in charge of the D.C. National Guard. And I would get hit all the time saying, well, why didn't Speaker Pelosi or why didn't the mayor activate the National Guard? Well, easy, because they have no control over the National Guard. The commander-in-chief of the D.C. National Guard is not, there's no governor of D.C., it's the President of the United States, and by definition, the Secretary of the Army. And so it was clear. And ironically, 4 years later, the president is very proud to announce how in charge of the D.C. National Guard he in fact is. So all those conspiracies that we conveniently forget, yeah, he has a very different viewpoint now.
Yeah. Ms. Loria, it's wonderful to see you again, and thank you for joining us from Virginia. I wonder to what extent you think the work of the January 6th Select Committee, in terms of the hearings, the videos, the report, has been important in terms of the understanding of your constituents back in Virginia. Do you think that this is something that's actually made a difference in terms of developing an historical memory and consciousness of what happened?
Thank you, and it's great to be back with you and other members from our committee. I think it's been stated in several ways, and Adam mentioned it just a few minutes ago. It is the record that will exist for history and for posterity. Our children, our grandchildren, their children, they will know the history, they will know the truth as much in this moment in time, however brief it is in the big scheme of things, although it may feel long day to day. That will be recorded for history, that President Trump summoned a mob to the Capitol, which violently attacked police officers, caused deaths, threatened the functioning of our democracy, but it didn't succeed. And the myths that are being perpetuated today to keep it alive, they're not going to succeed either, because the history books that our grandchildren will study, and not only about the day of January 6th, but continuing to study the way that our government is continuing to function as an effective and fair democracy, will prove that the work we did on January 6th was important.
You're back. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've been joined by Senator Schiff. We've been anxiously awaiting your testimony. Senator Schiff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 5 years ago, in the aftermath of January 6th and the attack on the Capitol, the Select Committee documented in painstaking detail how our democracy held, just barely, in large part thanks to a critical mass of honorable officials who withstood President Trump's pressure campaign to subvert the law and overturn the election results. People like Brad Raffensperger, Gabriel Sterling, Rusty Bowers, Ruby Freeman, and Shay Moss, among many others, who, as the Select Committee documented, faced extraordinary pressure to betray their oaths and to overturn the will of the voters. They never bent or yielded, and their names will be etched in history. The Select Committee's final report detailed how President Trump pressured, for example, Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger in that now infamous phone call demanding that he find 11,780 votes. As Raffensperger told the committee, I felt then, and I still believe today, that this was a threat. When Raffensperger refused, the president and his allies turned their ire on election workers like Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, subjecting them to threats and harassment that upended their lives. The committee's report documents at least 200 acts of pressure by President Trump targeting state and local officials through meetings, phone calls, text messages, as well as social media campaigns. Then Arizona Speaker Rusty Bowers testified to the committee that when asked by President Trump and Rudy Giuliani to overturn Arizona's results, he told them directly, "You are asking me to do something against my oath, and I will not break my oath." Officials in Michigan and Pennsylvania received the same phone calls from President Trump telling them to have some backbone and do the right thing. What allowed these officials to hold the line in 2020? Courage, yes. Patriotism, without question. Dedication to duty, without a doubt. But they also had federal partners willing to follow the law. They had the Cyber Security and Infrastructure Security Agency providing critical election security support. They had federal courts, including judges appointed by President Trump himself, reject baseless claims and uphold the rule of law. Even Attorney General Bill Barr, who crossed many lines on behalf of the president, nevertheless testified before the committee, "I repeatedly told the president in no uncertain terms that I did not see evidence of fraud, that would have affected the outcome of the election." Today, however, the landscape has fundamentally changed. The election officials who stood strong in 2020 are being systematically purged, and the guardrails to protect the integrity of our elections are being taken down brick by brick. By Donald Trump, by his enablers, by those willing to look the other way for the sake of political expediency. This administration is working methodically to ensure that when the next test comes, there will be few, if any, left to resist. First, they've eliminated the federal support system. They've ended all election security work at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. They fired employees who worked on election-related programs. They've ceased funding the Election Infrastructure Information Sharing and Analysis Center, the very organization that helped state and local officials respond to cyber attacks on election systems. Second, they've replaced trusted public servants with loyalists. Attorney General Pam Bondi and the president's former personal lawyers are now in leadership positions at the Justice Department, and they have proved themselves more than willing to adopt and disseminate conspiracy theories about the 2020 election. An attorney who worked alongside the architects of the fake elector scheme now represents DOJ in its Fulton County litigation. Another who tried to throw out 200,000 ballots in Wisconsin now works at the DOJ Civil Rights Division. Trump's Justice Department has even fired or demoted career prosecutors and investigators who are doing their jobs by holding violent attackers accountable. Third, they're creating legal pretexts for future subversion. In March 2025, the president issued an executive order that purports to establish documentary proof of citizenship requirements for voter registration, to decertify voting machines used throughout the country, and to restrict election funding to states that allow post-election day receipt of ballots. While federal courts have stopped parts of this order, it serves to sow confusion and provide cause to refuse to certify future election results. How, the president may ask in November, can we trust the results from an election run on voting machines that he previously sought to decertify? And fourth, they're weaponizing DOJ to intimidate voters and local officials. The department has filed lawsuits against 18 states, largely those with Democratic majorities, seeking complete unredacted voter rolls with Americans' personal identifying information. It's easy to see the script they could deploy to call into question future election outcomes without any basis in fact. They could claim, for example, the Department of Justice cannot confirm that X state's elections were free of voter fraud because they refused to share voter information with the federal government. And perhaps most ominously, we've seen the president's efforts to coerce Colorado into releasing Tina Peters, a county clerk convicted of serious state-level election-related crimes, including going so far as to veto a bill unanimously passed by both chambers of Congress that delivers clean drinking water to rural Coloradans. In doing so, President Trump continues to signal to election administrators nationwide that if they commit crimes on his behalf, they will have the full support of the office of the president and, if needed, a pardon. As a result, we're seeing massive turnover among election workers since 2020. Many who stood firm have been pushed out, harassed, and driven out by threats. They're now being replaced by individuals who may be more than willing to bend or break the law when pressure comes. As the Select Committee warned in its findings, the greatest threat to democracy comes from those in positions of power who are willing to subvert the rule of law. That is exactly what this administration is trying to engineer. Despite the challenges facing our democracy, we can and must ensure a free and fair election this fall and far into the future. As the Select Committee concluded in its report, had enough state officials gone along with President Trump's plot, his attempt to stay in power might have worked. It is fortunate that a critical mass of honorable officials withstood President Trump's pressure to participate in this scheme. These brave individuals proved that standing firm in defense of democracy is possible even under extraordinary pressure. We must prepare to do so again. I thank you.
I thank the gentleman for his testimony. We will now hear from our last questioner, the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Dean.
Thank you, Chairman. And I thank Representative Loria, Representative Kinzinger, and Senator Schiff, colleagues and friends, for your testimony, for your work on the Select Committee. That work will last for all of history, and I thank you for it. I went to every single one of the meetings that I possibly could. And Adam, to your point, to hear from the brave Americans who put themselves at risk, not just representatives, but the brave Americans who had the courage to tell the truth about what had happened and the pressures that they had been under, whether they were in the administration or outside the administration. Elaine, you started with the notion of oath and duty. Actually, I think all of you spoke to that issue. It is so clear that, as Jack Smith's testimony reveals, the president, after a series of lies, the lies that continue to this day, he invited the mob, he incited the mob, and then he exploited the mob as he continued the series of lies to millions of Americans. And I remember I had the solemn honor, probably the highest honor I will ever serve here as a member of Congress. I was asked by Speaker Pelosi to be an impeachment manager for the second impeachment of Donald Trump, serving alongside so many of the folks here. And I remember people saying, well, wait a second, you know, he couldn't have foreseen that that could have happened. Well, of course, he could foresee, and the folks around him could foresee. But the 187-minute delay sitting in the dining room, are you kidding me? Representative Swalwell asked about a comparison to another president acting in such a way. Could you imagine another president waiting 5 minutes when his vice president, members of the House and Senate were under such a critical attack? And I guess I want to just ask you each quickly. I agree with you. We're going to face the same problem again. And maybe, Mr. Kinzinger, you could help us the most. Most people say to me, why is it only Adam Kinzinger and few others? When will they part company with this man of lies and corruption? Can you give us any understanding of that?
I mean, when it's been 10 years of him around and you invest so much of yourself in helping to advance the lie, you now take ownership of it if you admit that's what it is. And humans are unbelievably capable of convincing ourselves of anything. And keep in mind the first term of Donald Trump, there are a lot of your colleagues, my colleagues, that either didn't run again, they were beat or whatever for speaking out. And so after 10 years, the only folks left are those that are very willing to bow down and to offer everything to the great Donald Trump. And I tell you, when it ends is in 3 years when he's out of office. And all of a sudden, you know, and potentially what happens here, power is the one thing that can wake them up. And so they're going to lose it, and it's going to be a pretty bad day for them when they do.
Thank you all for your extraordinary service to our country. I yield back.
Thank you so much. Senator, you'd like to comment on that?
You know, I would. One of the issues that we looked at as part of the January 6th committee, but it was also larger than the scope of what we could effectively wrap our heads around, is the challenge of where Americans now get their information and how we get it from such very different places. And I think in answer to your question, not just about this president, but about so much of what divides the country, we're going to have to figure out a way of becoming better consumers of information, of breaking down some of the stovepipes again, because we each live in such different information worlds. I'm old enough to have rushed back to my college dormitory to watch Walter Cronkite's last broadcast, and that was a time when there was a large body of agreed upon fact. And we might differ with what to do with those facts, but at least we agreed there were facts. Now people tune into the news they want to hear to reinforce the views they already have, or they have it curated for them on social media that shows them only what they want to see because it rewards time on their platform. This to me is one of the most cross-cutting challenges we have. And I think in order to avoid this kind of ability to gaslight a significant part of the country by claiming you cannot believe your lying eyes, you can't believe what you're hearing, you can only believe me, we're going to have to find a way to break through those information silos. And I think this disruption we've had in how we get information is every bit as seismic as the invention of the printing press must have been. But civilization had centuries to get used to that innovation and not a few wars. We've had a relative millisecond to get used to this media environment, and we're going to have to figure this out. But Chairman, I thank you for hosting this hearing along with Leader Jeffries. Thank you, Chairman, for your service, and to Adam and Elaine, my colleagues. Very grateful for your work. Was very proud to serve with you on the January 6th committee. And Adam, thank you for your continued courage and willingness to speak out.
And I want to thank our colleagues for appearing here today. And I'll now excuse you and invite our next panel of witnesses to take their seat. So much. I'll now recognize our distinguished current members. for 3 minutes to provide summaries of their testimony. The full written remarks will be submitted for the record. However, our first speaker has the magic minute.
That's why I wore the pin today, to get that magic minute. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your leadership. You and Liz Cheney did such a remarkable job leading this, the committee, and now in the leadership of our leadership, Hakeem Jeffries, Pete Aguilar, who's there, and others, Congresswoman Clark as well. Thank you for bringing us together today. On January 6th, 5 years ago, we began the day prayerfully. We had a Zoom call with our members because it was the time of COVID. And on that call, I said, this is the Feast of the Epiphany. This is an important Christian feast, and let us hope that that word epiphany, which means we also not only a feast of the Epiphany, but the idea of the Epiphany, that people will see the light in a different way. We were prepared that day under the leadership of Jamie Raskin. He had prepared us in advance to go to the floor very, very legally. It was about the facts and it was about the law. And it was very nonpartisan. In fact, all of our testimony was based on Republican testimony throughout the states that would be in question. We prayed for the president. We said we weren't going to mention his name in our testimonies, the facts and the law, the numbers in the races. And I continue to pray for the president because I could never have had the idea that a president of the United States would incite an insurrection on the capital of the United States, this symbol of democracy throughout the world, on the Constitution of the United States, which he took, and we all took, an oath to uphold, on the Congress of the United States, who that day had the congressional responsibility to accept the results, to certify the results of the election. The list goes on. And today, that president who incited that insurrection continues to lie about what happened that day. On my way over here, I saw on TV that he was claiming that we did not ask for the National Guard. I thank Representative Kinzinger and as well as Elaine Loria for setting the record straight and other testimony that you have heard here. For over 3 hours, we begged him to send the National Guard. He never did it. He took joy in not doing it. It was savoring that. And right now, he was saying on TV today, I wanted to send it, they just wouldn't do it. His own Secretary of Defense, acting Secretary of Defense, testified under oath against what the president is saying today. Maybe not in public, but under oath. God forbid that they ever put this president under oath. His people know never to do that because who knows what will happen. But what he's saying today, still lying about it, is an insult to the American people. Good-thinking people in our country, and I believe in the goodness of the American people. Believing in their goodness is what gives us hope that we can move on from this even stronger. His lies that he continues to tell are an insult. The courage of our founders, the beautiful vision they had of this country. And they wrote the Constitution. Thank God they made it amendable so that we could expand freedom over time. But in that Constitution, they knew that we could have a rogue president. Hence, they put impeachment there. But they never suspected that at the same time we'd have a rogue United States Senate, wouldn't have the courage to testify to the truth. However, Senator Mitch McConnell, the leader of the Senate at that time, joined us in calling for the National Guard. Get it over here right away. He used a little slight profanity in what he said, and yet he refused to vote for the impeachment. But nonetheless, getting back to this actual date. Because of Sergeant Aguero Canal, Harry Dunn, Eugene Goodman, Michael Fanone, Daniel Hodgins, Caroline Edwards, because of the actions of these members of Congress and their courage, and I name just a few, but because of the National Guard, our members of Congress were protected. And some of them are here, and I see so many more who will testify. We all know the leadership that was provided by one of our colleagues who will testify, and he told them to take off their pins because these people were coming to get us. How many times did I hear they were going to put a bullet in my F-word head? That's what I heard on TV while we were seeing this on TV. But one thing I knew when we saw that on TV was, despite what anybody would say, that we would go to the floor that night and show the world that the Congress of the United States, that our democracy had survived the insurrection that the United States president had incited. And I want to especially thank the mother Gladys and son Kenny, in attendance of Officer Brian Sicknick, Officer Jeffy Smith, his widow Erin is in attendance, and also Officer Howard Livingood's family, Officer Kyle DeFreytag, and Officer Gunnar Hashida. These families made the supreme sacrifice for our democracy. And that day, what particularly offended me was, we know that our founders, the Times have found us, right, Mr.? The Times found our founders to establish this country. The Times found Lincoln to save the Union. The Times found us to save our democracy as well. But when we were watching this on TV, we could see the Confederate flag being flown under Lincoln's dome, the dome that Lincoln built during the Civil War to show the world that America was resilient. Lincoln's dome, there's the Confederate flag, while they were defecating on the floor of the Capitol, insulting the people who managed the Capitol, the staff and all the rest. But it was the courage of our national police and also the Metropolitan Police that saved our lives. It was the courage of our members to go back to the floor that night. I was so proud of them, because you never know in terms of whatever is happening in the White House still. It took courage to go back to that floor. Still, when we went back to the floor to continue the work of the Constitution, the Republican members decided to still challenge the results of the election. That it wasn't honest. I mean, the lies were so pervasive. They were so sad. They were so sick. It's almost if you drum up something from the past. Have you no decency? Do you not care about your oath of office? Is your loyalty to that man who incited an insurrection more than your oath of office? Is your political career more important than America to you? Why are you here? Why are you here? So again, I want to just say that with all of this, one of the proudest moments of my 8 years of speaker and 12 other years as leader, but the speaker part, was that we went to the floor and we honored our members, had the courage to go there after being under threat, being chased by these people, being under threat, to go to the floor to honor their oaths of office. Again, there's one thing, I mean, we're not going to forget, and this committee, the January 6th committee, thank you all for your service in that regard, because there is the record. Think it would have been if we didn't even have that. The public would not even know the destruction of it. The president is always saying to me, well, you weren't ready. I wasn't ready for a president of the United States. Yeah, I wasn't ready for a president of the United States to incite an insurrection against the Congress of the United States, against the Constitution, against the Capitol of the United States. No, who would be ready for that? But we are ready to save our democracy. The Times have found us to do that. And again, much to his dismay, we went to the floor that night in the House and in the Senate to honor our oath and to certify the results of the Electoral College. But the one thing that I'll never forgive them for is the trauma that they created in the lives of our members and their families who are seeing this, and the staff. When we came back from the undisclosed location, where they wanted us to stay, they said, you stay there in a couple of days, you can do that. No, we're going now, and we're going to the Capitol, and we're not staying in the undisclosed location. And we're not doing that. Forget that. So when we went in and saw the staff are these young people who are idealistic, who come to Washington, Democrats and Republicans, come here to be part of what's happening and what will happen for the future. And to see the trauma in their eyes because of this inciter of an insurrection and these people who followed him. Again, one of them having a shirt, Auschwitz, 6 million were not enough, for example, of some of the people who were there. So, again, I thank you for the magic minute. Again, I have so much, there was so much going on there. But what was going on there is in a bipartisan way, we were asking the President of the United States again and again and again. When we had the Department of Defense on the phone, we said, pretend this was the Pentagon, and they were doing this at the Pentagon. What would you do? What would you do? But this president continues to lie about that fact. And that fact is important because it costs lives. It caused trauma. It sent the wrong message to the world about what democracy is. It was something that made Putin proud. See, democracy doesn't really work because of this President of the United States. An insult to the institution in which he serves, an insult to the founders of our country, an insult to the intelligence of the American people. I yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentlelady yields back her time. For the record, I'd like to say that there are between 2,300 and 2,600 National Guardsmen stationed in the District of Columbia right now, brought here by the President of the United States. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Illinois for 3 minutes, Ms. Kelly.
First, I'd like to thank Leader Jeffries and the leadership team, Congressman Benny Thompson and Congressman Jamie Raskin for hosting this hearing as we remember January 6th insurrection 5 years ago. We remember this day as Republicans try to erase this insurrection from history. I will never, ever forget hiding on my hands and knees in the gallery. I'm not as brave as Congressman Benny Thompson, so I took my pin off, it was COVID, I took my mask off, anything that was identifying. I remember texting my late husband and my adult children to tell them what was happening. After receiving so many texts and phone calls because family, friends, and associates were so concerned, I clearly remember hearing the shot when the police officers shot the woman. I remember the 3 knocks on the door and no one wanted to answer because we didn't know who it was. And then finally it was the Capitol Police telling us that we could run out the door, running downstairs and running across halls to get to the safe place. I want to thank all those police officers that helped save our lives and protect us, and the police officers, as we talked about, the 140 that suffered injuries, the 5 that died. I also want to thank all of my colleagues that were in the gallery that day for all of the support. We have an unbreakable bond now, and we have our little gallery group that we lean on and talk to each other. I truly believe that day has led to even more political violence. You know, that was a big impetus. You know, after being sworn into a second term, President Trump pardoned, as we know, the January 6th insurrectionists, an outrageous decision. And many have been arrested for child molestation, sexual assault, and kidnapping. He let criminals loose in our country because he does not care for law and order unless it serves him. And his violent rhetoric has only gotten worse, and political violence across this country has increased drastically. And just the lies he's spreading about Minnesota State Representative Melissa Hortman, who was shot and killed in her own home. I believe it is our duty to uphold democratic norms, and we must condemn anyone who tries to overtake our democracy, whether it is the president or not. And lastly, I would be very, very interested, I don't know how we do it, but as a person that represents Chicago, who are those people behind the mask? I really believe that a lot of them could be the people that he let go. I don't have any proof, but it just really concerns me, their behavior and just the trauma that they have caused in the city and area that I represent, that Congressman Garcia represents. And I just wonder, who are those people behind the mask? And I would not be surprised if a lot of them, the way they advertise for their employment, are those people he let go. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you so much. Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Alabama for 3 minutes, Ms. Sewell.
It's hard to believe that 5 years has passed since the horrific January 6th attack on our nation's capital. For me, it is a memory that will be seared in my brain forever. As many of you know, I was one of the 30 members of Congress trapped in the House gallery as the Capitol was breached. If I close my eyes, I can still hear the thundering sound of the mob and the pounding of the door of the House chamber. I can still feel the sense of sheer terror as we struggle to fit on our gas masks and crawl on our knees towards the only open door at the opposite end of the gallery. As I sat huddled with my colleagues, I remember trembling and softly weeping, not just for our safety, but for the devastating threat to our democracy. Many of us frantically dialed our loved ones, unsure of what the next hours would bring. I don't think that any of us fully understood the magnitude of the danger that we were in until we got home in the wee hours of the morning and we turned on the television. Never in my wildest dreams would I have imagined what I saw. The images of rioters waving Confederate flags, smashing windows, assaulting police officers, and threatening to kill members of Congress and even the sitting vice president. What we saw on January 6th was an attempted coup. It was an effort to subvert the will of the American people and overturn the results of a free and fair election. It was incumbent upon all of us to condemn the violence that we witnessed and those who waged it. There are moments throughout history that have tested us as a nation. January 6th is one of them, as was Bloody Sunday in my hometown of Selma, Alabama, and the bombing of the 4 little girls at the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, and so many other defining moments along the way. Those moments can either make us stronger as a nation or they can tear us apart. We can use them as an opportunity to heal or to move forward, or we can sweep them under a rug for the sake of political convenience. It's maddening that so many of my colleagues across the aisle continue to choose the latter. I find it shameful that President Trump chose as the first action of his second term to condemn the criminals responsible for the violence. I find it equally disturbing that Speaker Johnson refuses to honor the brave officers who defended our democracy by installing the plaque that Congress voted on and passed more than 3 years ago. They say that if you don't know your history, you are bound to repeat your history. As a member of Congress that represents Alabama's Civil Rights District, I often tell my constituents, if we don't tell our stories, others will tell our stories, and they may not get it right. I am grateful to Leader Jeffries, Chairman Benny Thompson, for giving us this opportunity to tell our story and to shine a light on the horrific events of January 6th. In closing, I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to the many Capitol Police officers and law enforcement officers who defended our democracy that day. I also want to thank my fellow gallery colleagues, as we call ourselves. I want to thank them for checking on us, even now, 5 years later. This is the first time that I've been able to publicly speak about it. Because frankly, I could not believe that in our place of work, in the people's house, we were threatened that way. January 6th was a dark day in our nation's history, and I hope that we can all work together to ensure that such a heinous attack never, ever, ever happens again. I want to thank all of you for being here today, and I want to thank my fellow gallery colleagues for your courage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The gentlelady yields back. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Crow, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Thompson. Thank you, Speaker Pelosi, Leader Jeffries, Chairman Thompson, and members of the Select Committee for your incredible work, your leadership in articulating and preserving the facts and the memory and the history of what happened on January 6th. All of my colleagues have done a remarkable job chronicling the violence, the sheer brutality, as we saw 140 police officers brutally beaten by a mob, inspired and weaponized and sent to the United States Capitol on his behalf to do violence, to derail our democracy and the will of the voters. I served 3 combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan as a paratrooper and an Army Ranger, and I never thought I would see the type of violence that I saw overseas at the pantheon of our democracy. But I want this moment to be a moment of hope and resolve. It must be a moment of hope and resolve. There's been a lot of talk about oaths and leadership and bravery versus cowardice. There's a lot of cowardice in our country today. There are universities buckling, CEOs taking the knee, law firms cowing, members of Congress capitulating. There is a lot of it. But in moments of greatness and at pivotal times of our country, it's never the story of the cowards. It's never their story. It's always the story of the heroes, who are more often than not regular Americans doing amazing things. The story of people like Yeoman Wilder, a Little League coach in Harlem, who when federal agents descended on his baseball field and harassed and intimidated and threatened his kids, he said, no. These are my kids. This is my baseball field. You leave. You have no right to be here. It's the story of the millions of Americans who show up for No Kings rallies, the story of election officials who, despite threats and harassment and intimidation, say, no, I will do my duty. It is their story. As a paratrooper, there's a history and tradition that the senior paratrooper in a plane jumps out of the plane first, and then the other paratroopers follow. And it's based on the idea that fear is contagious, but so is courage. This is our moment. We never asked for it. None of us woke up this morning thinking we wanted to live in an era of extremism and violence where our democracy is being threatened and disassembled brick by brick. But that is always the nature of leadership. We never get to choose our moment. We only have to answer the question of what we are willing to do to stand up and meet that moment. And that is why I'm so proud to be here with the people at this table, the people at this dais, because you are all meeting the moment. America will meet the moment. And the Little League coaches, the election officials, the store clerks, the police officers, everybody will stand up and defend our country and our democracy at its time of great need. I'm so proud to be a part of it. I'm proud to be an American. And it is a time for new American patriotism, for us to take back our democracy and to move us forward in a better direction. I yield back.
Thank you so much for your testimony. I thank our colleagues for appearing here today.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to say
Madam
that
Speaker.
so much has been said by our colleagues about courage, and I want to acknowledge Pamela Hemphill for being the demonstration of so much courage here today. I also want to say that 1 year after January 6th, we had testimony from members, and now today we'll have more testimony, and this is really an important part of the record. So thank you so much. We have the, shall we say, they're bonded together forever for being protected. Thank you, Mr. Crow, for doing that. And I will just say this, 2 years after that, I'll mention what Zoe Rofkin mentioned. She said that they were going through the Capitol saying, where is Nancy, where is Nancy, where is Nancy? 2 years after that, a person was going through my house saying, where is Nancy, where is Nancy, where is Nancy, and acted violently against my husband. So this was a horrible thing, but it bore other horrible things with it. And again, our resilience is our hope, and our hope is our resilience to save our democracy. Thank you for giving us this opportunity.
Thank you so much. And I know most of us have had similar challenges of that date. The committee members have constantly getting threats and all that thing. It's not who we are as a country, but when the person at the top promotes that kind of action, this is what you get. And it's so unfortunate. We can differ, but we don't have to do it violently. And so that's where we are faced. So again, let me thank all of you for appearing here today and offering your testimony. And I'll now excuse you and invite our next panel of witnesses to take their seat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'll now recognize our distinguished current members, each for 3 minutes, to provide summaries of their testimony. Their written testimony in full will be submitted for the record. Mr. Morelli.
Mr. Chairman, members of the panel, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. As Leader Jeffries has often noted, January 6th must be remembered as a dark day in American history like September 11th or December 7th. We must never forget what happened here 5 years ago. Regretfully, that's what congressional Republicans want us to do. House Republicans' attempts to whitewash January 6, 2021 began the weeks that followed the attack, but they accelerated when then Leader McCarthy reportedly promised to direct the Committee on House Administration to release tens of thousands of hours of sensitive Capitol security footage in exchange for votes to become Speaker of the House. As a result of this corrupt bargain, in February of 2023, the committee provided unfettered access to tens of thousands of hours of sensitive Capitol security footage to MAGA media personality Tucker Carlson. The footage was made public without approval from the United States Capitol Police. To the contrary, the Capitol Police had already informed committee Republicans that it opposed releasing the footage, citing the significant security concerns it presented. Indeed, the top lawyer for the Capitol Police noted, and I quote, "The location of each CCV camera might enable a bad actor to exploit vulnerabilities in the system," end quote. The Assistant Chief of Police testified that camera footage of the interior of the Capitol is, again I quote, "highly sensitive information that access to it should be strictly limited," end quote. Congressional Republicans ignored these law enforcement officials and released it anyway. This disclosure was just the first of many efforts to rewrite the history of the Capitol attack. Congressional Republicans created a subcommittee of the Committee on House Administration to investigate the Select Committee's investigation. That subcommittee issued an ahistorical report in service of nothing more than politically distorting a shameful and tragic chapter in our nation's history. They lied about the Select Committee members, about their work, and they haven't stopped lying about January 6th ever since. Yet after spending millions of taxpayer dollars during their 2-year sham investigation, the subcommittee found no evidence of wrongdoing by the Select Committee because there was none. The absurd effort lasted longer than the Select Committee itself. Instead, the majority spent nearly 2 years trafficking in paranoid, long-debunked conspiracy theories and dangerous lies while ignoring its actual responsibility to run the House of Representatives and ensure that members and their families are safe from the very people that perpetrated the attack. Colleagues, if given the privilege to chair the Committee on House Administration under Speaker Jeffries, I will restore the committee's proper oversight functions. I will not waste taxpayer dollars entertaining ridiculous and disproven but nonetheless harmful conspiracy theories. We will respect the women and men of the United States Capitol Police by giving them not just empty words and gestures of appreciation, but the training they need and the pay they deserve. During the Select Committee's June 9, 2022 public hearing, Vice Chair Cheney rightly observed that President Trump summoned the mob, assembled the mob, and lit the flame of this attack. But an arsonist isn't the only one responsible for a fire. Those who stand by and watch it burn, or worse, fan the flames, carry that moral stain as well. Congressional Republicans experienced firsthand a deadly attack on this sacred place, on them, on their staffs, and on their country. But they chose and continue to choose cowardice, demonizing the innocent, protecting the guilty, and disparaging the patriotism of police officers who saved their lives even before the bloodstains were washed from the Capitol steps, all while claiming to back the blue no matter what. We cannot allow that to stand. We will not allow that to stand. And with that, I yield back, sir.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the young lady from California for 3 minutes. Ms. Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wish I didn't, but I still remember January 6, 2021 very clearly. It was my 4th day here in the Capitol as a member of Congress, and I literally didn't know my way around yet. My team walked me to the House gallery so I could watch the election certification proceedings. I was so proud to be one of the members chosen to be there. And I remember sitting there thinking about this incredible feat, peacefully passing the torch in our democracy. But then the insurrectionists breached the Capitol. Even 5 years later, there are things that I can't shake. The buzzing of the escape hoods, the fear when I couldn't open the packaging, the sound of the doors closing and being locked, introducing myself to my new colleagues as we were cowering under our chairs, thinking through what I could use as a weapon if I needed to, pens, my high heels, being sure that the elevator doors were going to open and someone with a machine gun was going to be right there, climbing over the chairs and under the railings to finally get out of the gallery. And I remember Annie Custer's hand, pulling me where I needed to go. I learned a few years ago that the insurrectionists were only 30 seconds behind us. 30 seconds. 30 seconds could have meant losing our democracy that day. That's how close we came. Before Congress, I spent my career working on conflict and political violence at the United Nations and the State Department. I worked on post-coup transitions and responses to electoral violence and violent extremism. I never thought that my experience would be quite so relevant here at home. I never thought that the U.S. Capitol would be the place my parents most feared that I was still alive. I've worked in countries even more torn apart than ours is. And because of that, I know that there is a way to heal and to repair and to move forward. To do that, we need accountability. Accountability for all the damage done that day, not just for the foot soldiers, but those at the top doing the planning, the justifying, the ordering, the enabling. And we need to make sure history doesn't get erased. But even beyond that, we need long-term solutions. We need to heal the deep divisions and feelings of mistrust and resentment in our country. Now, addressing these fault lines in our society, especially around race and class and inequality, They won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight, but it is necessary to bring us back together again as Americans. Since January 6, 2021, we've seen more attacks on our democratic institutions. And while they've bent, they haven't broken. And even with all of the chaos caused by our colleagues and by those trying to divide us, I'm still optimistic. I think we have brighter days ahead of us. I know that we do, because I've seen it happen in other places. All it takes is all of us coming together to decide that our future and our democracy is worth fighting for. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you so much. Chair now recognizes the young lady from Connecticut, Ms. DeLaura. for
Thank you,
3
Mr.
minutes.
Chairman. Thank you for your work on this committee. I want to thank Leader Jeffries and the entire committee for the great work that you have done and continue to do. January 6, 2021 was one of the darkest days in our nation's history. I was here that day. Any insinuation that the rioters who assaulted that Capitol that day were anything less than violent offenders is an insult to the brave police officers and the Capitol staff who put their lives, and some who lost their lives, to defend our democracy. And I witnessed firsthand the violence, the fear, the chaos that Trump's lies and conspiracy theories brought to our sacred halls. It was not simply an attack on the Capitol building, it was an attack on our democracy, our Constitution, our shared values, and those values that we share with Americans. My story, very simply, I went to the Capitol. Connecticut was not one of the states being challenged. I asked, staff person drove me there. I said to him, Harper, you go stay in my Capitol office. I'm going to the gallery where I joined other members, and we were just sitting listening, and I wanted to see it. It was a historic experience of what was happening. And as I was sitting there not long after, I see the Speaker of the House removed. I see the Majority Leader removed. I see the whip moved. And so we all know that that means that something is afoot, and we're looking around and trying to figure out what happened. And the Capitol Police go to the microphone and they say, sit down, we're going to continue the proceedings. And then a few minutes later, they got back up and said, you know, get your gas masks out. And to be very honest, I never even knew that there were gas masks under the seats in the House of Representatives. Pulled it out, couldn't get it open, didn't know what the hell to do with it, and so forth. Asked Jim Hines, help me, and which he did. But I have that gas mask, and I have it in my office as a reminder of what that day was about. And they told us then to evacuate. We had to evacuate you. And as Sarah has described, it's not a continuous area around that gallery. You're up over railings, under railings, etc. And we saw the barricaded door, the broken glass window with insurrectionists putting their hands through and guns being pointed at them. And then there were the gunshots. And we heard them say, hit the floor, which we all did. We hit the floor. And Jason Crow told us to take off our pins, take off any form of identification. We held hands going around that Capitol gallery. And I had my phone, and I was afraid to call my husband because it recalled 9/11. 9/11, when people made that last phone call to their loved ones. But I did call, and I said, Stan, just tell the kids, I'm all right. They're going to get us out of here. And the Capitol Police got us out of there. They told us to hold when we got to that door to go out because we weren't sure who was behind the door. And then they said, okay. They opened the doors, and the insurrectionists were lying on the ground with the Capitol Police with guns over them. They hurried us down the steps to get out. I wanted to get my staff member. They said, no, ma'am, we can't do that. He is forever traumatized. It took him months before he would ever go back into the Capitol. Let me just end here because we had a president who incited a riot, and we witnessed that he refused to call the National Guard out, which was his jurisdiction. Nancy Pelosi did not have that authority to do that. And so that frightening message is that those who can commit political violence that the president is there on their behalf, and he says, I have your back. I have your back. We cannot allow the story of January 6th to be rewritten as a mere riot or a protest that got out of hand. To do so would dishonor the sacrifices that the Capitol Police officers made to preserve our republic, embolden those who would undermine it. I join my colleagues today. I thank the Capitol Police every day when they come to work to protect us and our democracy. We faced hell on January 6th, and despite overwhelming violence, they protected our democracy. They secured our Capitol, regardless of who is in the White House. I know that I will, and my colleagues, will keep the faith of this great democracy. Thank you, and I know I've gone over time, and I thank you for your indulgence.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Washington, Ms. Jayapal, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It has been 5 years since Donald Trump incited an insurrection at the United States Capitol to stop Congress from certifying the 2020 election, and 5 years that Trump and Republicans have tried to erase and rewrite that day. Across the country, Americans want to know what are the consequences for a president who tried to steal an election in furtherance of his own singular power. If we cannot tell the truth of that day, then we fail our founders and our future. We embolden dictators and authoritarians around the world, and we betray Benjamin Franklin's challenge to us when he said, we have a republic if we can keep it. January 6th was created by a madman, his cult followers, and those too afraid to stand up for him. I too was one of the few dozen members of Congress trapped in the House gallery, one of the very last to be evacuated. I had just had knee surgery. I was unable to easily move. I had a cane ready to whack insurrectionists that came in. To this day, I vividly hear the pounding on the doors, the screaming of insurrectionists threatening to kill us. And when we finally escaped, I still see those insurrectionists lying spread-eagled on the floor, surrounded by those brave Capitol Police officers with guns pointed at them. I didn't know if I would make it out alive that night, and in the early hours of the next morning, I am so proud that Democrats and a few brave Republicans came back and fulfilled our enormous responsibility to certify the election and ensure a peaceful transfer of power. And I am forever indebted to our incredible gallery group that formed that very next day and that was there throughout this time for each other. However, the personal and collective trauma of that day remain. You hear it here today, and the after effects have continued to ripple out. Trump's pardoning of over 1,500 insurrectionists, the largest pardon of violent criminal offenders in our history, made a mockery of our justice system and allowed for several to recommit violence. Our brave Capitol Police officers and law enforcement officers who defended and even died for our country have still not seen a congressionally mandated plaque installed that honors their service. The refusal of most Senate Republicans to convict Trump after the House impeached him allowed for his return as president, this time unleashed to steal Americans' health care, enrich himself, and engage in authoritarian behavior that violates our Constitution and our separation of powers. Without accountability, our democracy is not safe, and this can happen again with worse consequences. For 244 years, we have had peaceful transfers of power. The founders planned for a potential dictator as president, but they did not plan for an entire party to follow that dictator. They had faith that members of Congress of both parties would put country first. That faith is being severely tested. In the courts, there is one last chance to hold Trump accountable with a case that several of us members filed to ensure that we have guardrails against tyranny. And here in Congress, we have a responsibility every single day to never rest until we have that real accountability for that day. That is the only way we can keep our republic. And I am grateful to you, Mr. Chairman, and our colleagues for having this testimony today. I yield back.
Thank you so much. I thank our colleagues for appearing here today, and I'll now excuse you and invite our next panel of witnesses to take their seat. I will now recognize our distinguished current members, each for 3 minutes to provide summaries of your testimony. Their written remarks will be submitted for the record. I now recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Torres, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Thompson and members, for convening this hearing. I want to start by thanking the heroes that saved the day that day, and that is the law enforcement officers, Capitol Police, who were here protecting us. 5 years ago, I was on the balcony of the House chamber as a violent mob instructed by Donald Trump to march to the Capitol and to stop the certification of a free and fair election invaded the Capitol. Those were the scariest 45 minutes of my life. Reading the alerts, preparing to fight, working watching my colleagues being evacuated below us and not seeing a clear exit for myself, no immediate security, and a balcony door that would not be locked, that couldn't be locked from the inside. Before coming to Congress, I spent more than 17 years as a 911 dispatcher. That training took over for me that day. I have heard horrific crimes unfold in my ears. I've never saw myself being involved in one. I began recording and photographing what was happening, not knowing if the security cameras were still working. I did not know then that those images would become some of the only evidence of the terror unfolding in the gallery. I know what gunshots sound like, but when I heard one inside the Capitol, I had to question whether it was real. It was unthinkable that a gun could be fired inside the temple of American democracy. When the shot rang out, we were lying face down on the floor just above it. At one point, officers believed that they had cleared a path for evacuation. We had only seconds. And as I looked back to make sure every member was moving towards safety, time ran out. We were ordered down again to be silent and to crawl away from the threat. Eventually, another path was cleared, and we were told to run. And as we exited the balcony, we saw men running toward us in plain clothes. And for a moment, we thought they were part of the mob. They turned out to be our security, who escorted us to a safe room. And as I began to run down the first of 3 flights of steps, my phone rang. Up until that moment, I was in survival mode. I did not think to call my family, but I answered a call from my son. My son is a police officer. He was watching the attack unfold on television. I had seconds to tell him, "Sweetheart, I am okay. I can't talk to you right now. I am running for my life. 5 years later, the threat to fuel that violence has returned. The same president who incited is back, and more than 1,500 January 6 violent insurrectionists have been pardoned. We cannot erase the violence of January 6, 2021, and I am introducing legislation to confront political violence, close accountability gaps, and preserve the truth. The January 6 Truth and Transparency Act tracks whether pardoned individuals re-offend. The Insurrection Sentencing Enhancement Act ensures January 6 convictions carry consequences, even if later pardoned. The January 6 Oral History Project Act preserves firsthand testimony, so the truth is never erased or rewritten. These laws are about truth, responsibility, and memory. We want the American people to know what happens after the January 6 pardons, that violence against our democracy has real consequences, and that the truth of that day is never erased or rewritten. Thank you, Chairman Thompson, for the opportunity to be with all of you today.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Chair will yield 3 minutes to the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Escobar.
Thank you, Chairman, and thanks to everyone who took time today to make sure that we do not forget the truth of January 6th. The videos, audio, and photographs of the violent domestic terrorists who attacked the Capitol 5 years ago are still very chilling for those of us who were there that day. And frankly, much of what we've heard today is really triggering. It's for those of us who were trapped in the gallery, it's really hard to relive that terror and that trauma. And so I'm grateful to all of you for your strength and resilience. I've many times recounted the terror, rage, and fear I felt while trapped in the gallery of the House of Representatives and the trauma that followed. But I'd like to focus on something that doesn't nearly get enough attention in our country: the betrayal by Donald Trump of the brave men and women who defended us and our nation's capital that day. Some of them were here with us during this event. These brave patriots, these law enforcement heroes, were beaten, attacked, some died, and the emotional and physical injuries that they sustained remain to this day. Some of them had to leave their law enforcement career, a career that they loved, because of those injuries. And some of those who had to leave their careers still haven't financially recuperated. It is absolutely shameful that while Donald Trump pardoned and released nearly 1,600 of those insurrectionists, members of the violent mob, there are law enforcement professionals who were forced to retire who are still struggling today, who still have to get physical therapy, who still have to undergo serious behavioral health treatment, all because they defended our democracy and defended us. Many of those who were pardoned have gone on to commit additional crimes like child molestation, kidnapping, and sexual assault. And by the way, they're back in DC today. They are celebrating themselves and they're marching to the Capitol. But back to our heroes and our protectors. Despite the loss of their career, their health, and mental health, what's been outrageous is that these officers are being denied their public safety officers' benefits. To date, not a single living injured January 6th officer has been awarded this benefit, and some are resorting to GoFundMe accounts in order to get by. We have to fix this. We have to address this. This is not right. And at the same time, Donald Trump has talked about setting up a compensation fund for the criminals who committed these horrific acts. Colleagues, we cannot let this happen. We will not let this happen. I want to again thank these law enforcement heroes for saving our lives, for their courage, for their commitment, and their resilience. Every American should know that this administration, led by the man who inspired this attack and who has never faced accountability for this attack, this administration rewards criminals and punishes patriots. As long as we are alive, we will not allow history to be whitewashed, and as long as we are in public service, we have to remain committed to a country where truth matters and where these patriots are protected and upheld. Thank you, Chairman, for the opportunity. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Cohen, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and my neighbor to the south. This is a day none of us will forget. I was in the gallery. I had my phone with me, so I could see some of the information of what was going on outside, but we didn't know it was going to come to the chamber. At some point, I saw kind of disorder on the floor, and the sergeant at arms coming down, and some of the member on the dais who was presiding coming down, and I knew something was happening. And I looked down and I yelled, "Call Trump and tell him to call his Revolutionary Guard off." Of course, they didn't do that, but it was the Revolutionary Guard, and they still are there. And I don't know if they're with ICE or if they're standing for another time, stand back, but stand by. They're around, and Trump hadn't changed. I got up, and an officer came who was helping protect him, make sure the doors were locked, and I heard the pounding on the doors and all, and he helped me put my mask on. And I was walking out. David Trone preceded me to go out in the gallery, and there's rails in the gallery, and we were going out towards the Republican side, and Trone just put his leg over it and kind of went on. Well, I got a real bad leg from having polio, and I knew if I put my leg over there, I might get stuck on that pole, and that'd be real embarrassing. It may be painful, too. So I limboed, in a kind of a reverse limbo, and got under the pole, the rail, and got out. We got in an elevator, and we came down, and a couple of guys said, "Where do we go now?" I said, "Just follow me and come on." And we went as fast as we could towards Rayburn while we saw policemen come in the opposite direction with their guns out. It was a scary time. I got to my office in Rayburn, I locked the doors to the outside, and I locked myself in my office. And while I was there, I probably got at least 500 texts and phone calls from everybody I'd ever met in my life, I think. Well, my hero as a child was a ball player named Minnie Minoso. We maintained a friendship through his life and up into the fact we, in essence, got him in the Hall of Fame, helped with that, and we were friends and we'll be friends forever. So I'm sitting there with got a Minnie Minoso bat in my hand, sitting in my office, waiting for him to come in. And one of my text messages is from Charlie Minoso, Charlie Rice Minoso, who's Minnie's son. He said, "I hope you're okay, and I hope everybody in the office is okay. I'm concerned about you. I want you to know, my dad will be thinking about you." I said, "I got your dad's bat in my hand." And he said, "If he was there, he'd be swinging it." I said, "You're damn right he would." Well, we stayed there, and I watched the tube, and then we got up and went and voted, and that was a great day that we voted. Speaker Pelosi was heroic in getting us called back, and Mike Pence was heroic in not succumbing to President Trump's dictations that he changed the law and the rules and count the votes differently. All of the public officers were great. Capitol Police, the Metropolitan Police here, National Guardsmen and others, great heroes. And I value all of them, and they protect us every day, and they don't get the respect that they should and the regard. But I think the greatest hero of all is Jack Smith. Jack Smith is like Mr. Stewart Goes to Washington. He is a lawyer who is a lawyer's lawyer. And he found in his work that there was an indictable offense, and he indicted the president for what he did. That needed to happen. He was only stopped because of the Justice Department's rule that you can't prosecute a sitting president. It was not dropped. It was because Trump won the election. But Jack Smith pursued it all the way through. And he is, in my opinion, he testified before a Republican committee that was set up to try to get him in a trap so they could prosecute him for something they could create. Their vindictive tour needs to stop, but it's still going on, a vendetta. Jack Smith stood firm. He spoke truth, even though he knew that if he said anything at all that they could possibly conjure up in another manner, he would be indicted, and they'd probably take his bar license away and try to put him in jail. He said he followed the facts and then applied it to the law. In his recent deposition, he told the Judiciary Committee, "The decision to bring charges against President Trump was mine, but the basis for those charges rests entirely with President Trump and his actions, as alleged in the indictments returned by the grand jury in 2 different districts. Our investigation developed and proved beyond a reasonable doubt that President Trump engaged in a criminal scheme to overturn the results of the 2020 election and to prevent the lawful transfer of power. That was heroic actions by him. President Trump is a treasonous individual, and it's awful that he's still in the White House and destroyed the East Wing, and as Mr. Raskin quite said, had graffiti put up over John Kennedy's name at the Kennedy Center. One date, somebody mentioned, dates will always remember it, and a September date, January date, and Pearl Harbor. We'll never forget November 22, 1963, of those of us who are alive. I remember it all the time. Whenever I think about it, I start to tear up. I'm about to tear up now. And the idea that he put his name over John Kennedy's should never be forgotten, and he should be wiped out. I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to Leader Jeffries and all of the other leaders who have made sure that we commemorate this day appropriately with this hearing. I was born and raised in Washington, D.C., and the United States Capitol has been a building permanently etched in my mind from an early age. It regularly came into my view as daily life took my family and I around the District of Columbia. To me, the Capitol was always a citadel, a beacon of freedom, democracy, and justice. At the age of 10, I developed the vision that one day I would serve there as a legislator. I was always so proud. Even today, I'm still in awe of the United States Capitol, what it stands for, and the fact that it has been my workplace for the last 19 years. On January 6, 2021, amidst social distancing in response to the COVID pandemic, then still ongoing, I was so proud to be one of a limited number of members of the House to be in the chamber to witness the certification of the 2020 elections. Though somewhat envious of those who were seated on the floor, I nonetheless savored the honor of having a seat in the House gallery from which I could observe this solemn proceeding. As the peaceful transfer of power was taking place in the chamber, the proceedings were rudely, then violently interrupted. The disorder became louder and louder as the insurrectionists got nearer and nearer. The cacophony shut down the speaker and caused the business of the House to stop. From the gallery, I watched as the speaker was extracted from the chair and my colleagues evacuated from the floor. What would happen to us in the gallery, I thought. The situation became scary, dire, and dangerous. I felt like a sitting duck. In those moments, while in self-preservation mode, I thought of jumping from the gallery onto the House floor so that I could be evacuated. My thoughts then turned to my colleagues also in the gallery, and my thoughts turned to my moral responsibility to them. I would never leave them to save myself. As we were being spirited out of the chamber into the hallway, I saw dozens of violent insurrectionists lying spread-eagled on the marble floor under the gunpoint of Capitol Hill police. I later learned that all of those insurrectionists had been released without charges because there were not enough law enforcement manpower to take them into custody. They all walked. They came into the U.S. Capitol, disrupted our work, and desecrated this citadel of democracy, and they all walked. Needless to say, I was gratified later when more than 1,500 perpetrators were prosecuted, some of the worst offenders receiving 20-year sentences. There was a sense that people had been held accountable for their crimes. Then on January 20th, 2025, Donald J. Trump shot Lady Justice on Fifth Avenue in broad daylight by pardoning each and every January 6th insurrectionist. It was a blow to justice and the rule of law in America. And my sense of anger at injustice has intensified as Donald Trump and his lapdog Republicans in Congress do everything in their power in an unholy and futile attempt to whitewash and rewrite the history of what happened on January 6th. While Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans continue their systematic assault on truth and justice, I will proudly stand in the breach with House Democrats and all people of goodwill to defend the concepts of truth, freedom, liberty, and justice for all, which is American democracy. And I'd like to thank the Capitol Hill police officers and the Metropolitan Police Department officers who defended us on that fateful day, and thank you, Speaker Emerita Pelosi, for your leadership during those troubled times. With that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. We've been joined by another member of the panel, a young lady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Scanlon, who is not necessarily one person in this situation, but we're trying to move forward, and we thank Ms. Torres for giving up her seat so you can join us. Ms. Scanlon, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you for arranging this hearing. I started January 6th, along with Congresswoman Dean, in a meeting with Democratic members of Congress from Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania was key to President Trump's effort to overturn the 2020 election. He and his allies had spread lies and conspiracy theories about the votes in Pennsylvania and elsewhere, but those claims were universally debunked and disproven and rejected in over 60 different cases, although a third of them were in Pennsylvania. That didn't stop his big lie. It just grew bigger, culminating in the violent attack on this building on January 6th. My colleagues and I that morning knew we'd have to defend Pennsylvania's votes, including from our Republican colleagues who'd just been sworn in on the very same ballots they were now challenging. But we had no idea that a violent mob would interrupt Congress's vote count, turning this building into a war zone. I never expected to have to barricade the doors to my office or to see the Vice President, members of Congress, and staff fleeing for their lives, to see hundreds of injured police officers, some losing their lives and their livelihoods in the aftermath. Those officers are our guardians, but also our friends. There's one young officer who I still can't see without tearing up because I didn't see him for weeks after January 6th, and I was afraid he'd been grievously injured. So I do still embarrass him by crying on his shoulder. But most of all, I never expected that 5 years later, the lies that led to that tragic day would continue. While members of the president's own party begged for his help that day and condemned his actions for a few days afterwards, they quickly knuckled under and joined his effort to erase or rewrite history. The handful of Republicans who put loyalty to country over party at that time have been driven from that party, and those remaining have encouraged his pernicious lies to fester. In his second term, Trump has elevated his allies and pardoned those who attacked the police in this building on his behalf, and he's attacked the truth tellers. Just last month, the House Judiciary Committee refused to allow Special Counsel Jack Smith to testify publicly about the mountain of evidence he's compiled that proved beyond a reasonable doubt that Trump had tried to overturn the 2020 election, once again trying to slam the door on the truth. Everyone should read or watch Jack Smith's testimony. Look, our country was built on shared truths. The Declaration of Independence opens with truths that we hold to be self-evident. And our Constitution strives to form a more perfect union grounded in the common good. But this president and his allies have rejected that sturdy foundation of shared facts and values. Instead, they've built a house of cards on lies and greed and the pursuit of power. But houses without a secure foundation cannot endure. The truth matters. Those who deny the horrific violence and lawlessness that inspired the January 6th attack on the Capitol want the American people to forget. They don't want you to question their house of cards or hold them accountable. But we must remember, Ever since January 6th, our Republican colleagues have said it's time to move on so the country can unite. We need the country to unite, but to unite in respect for the truth and love of country, to unite in holding accountable those who would lie and undermine our Constitution, because we've seen the consequences of the failure to do so. There can be no unity or accountability without a shared truth based on facts. So today, we remember and thank you for this opportunity. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Let me thank the witnesses for that testimony. I'd like to now excuse that witness and bring on our next panel of witnesses. We'll pause for the changeover.
I now recognize the chairman of the House Democratic Caucus, Pete Aguilar from California, another colleague from the January 6th Select Committee.
Thank you, Ranking Member Raskin. It's a privilege to be here with you, Chairman Benny Thompson, our current and former colleagues, to mark the 5th anniversary of the attacks on the Capitol and to honor the bravery of the police officers who sacrificed so much for our safety and democracy that day. We know Donald Trump is determined to whitewash what happened on January 6th, but try as he might, the facts have not changed. 5 years ago today, Donald Trump sat in the White House for 187 minutes, more than 3 hours, and did nothing. As the Capitol was invaded, police officers were beaten, and his own vice president was hunted. The most powerful person in the world watched his supporters attack the Capitol from just blocks away and did nothing to stop it. Not only did he refuse to call off the mob, but he poured fuel on the fire. As rioters were chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," streamed into the Capitol through smashed doors and windows, Trump tweeted, "Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution." In the minutes following that tweet, the violence intensified. Vice President Pence was rushed to safety, coming within 40 feet of the very people searching for him. Rioters closed in on the House and Senate chambers, and members of Congress still trapped inside. And all around the Capitol, police were beaten, bear sprayed, tasered by the mob acting in Trump's name. But still, Trump sat back and did nothing. As shocking as the January 6th insurrection was to us, it shouldn't have been a surprise to Donald Trump. It was what he wanted. For months, Trump had undermined the results of the 2020 election with the help of Republicans in Congress, concocted criminal schemes to subvert the Constitution, and ultimately instructed his supporters to march on the Capitol, all in an attempt to cling to power. In the words of former Special Counsel Jack Smith, the evidence was that he caused it, and that he exploited it, and that it was foreseeable to him. And the dangers of that day did not cease when the Capitol was eventually cleared. For years, career prosecutors and law enforcement professionals worked tirelessly to put the perpetrators of that day behind bars. Now, President Trump is putting the perpetrators in power and punishing those who held them accountable. Let's watch.
This is Jared Wise. He breached the Capitol on January 6. Now he's a member of Donald Trump's Department of Justice, where he is a senior advisor to the head of the Weaponization Working Group, targeting law enforcement officials who pushed for accountability after January 6.
Wrongful capital injury! Wrongful capital injury!
It's a key tool in Donald Trump's retaliation campaign. In the last year, the Department of Justice and Donald Trump have pressured FBI leadership to hand over lists of staff who worked on January 6 prosecutions.
For that to suddenly be coming from inside the Department of Justice, for this extraordinary example of political violence to be normalized and legitimated, that was what was most shocking to me.
Trump fired senior FBI officials who didn't cooperate, purged dozens more prosecutors who worked on January 6 cases, and pardoned hundreds of rioters who continue to seek their own retribution.
The people who did this, they need to feel the heat. They need to be put behind bars, and they need to be prosecuted.
For the people who bravely defended the rule of law on and after January 6, the political violence continues.
These political firings, I believe, have the purpose and effect of empowering vigilantes and militias that are loyal to the president, but ultimately unaccountable to the law.
Because their fellow rioters now have political appointments at the Department of Justice, they believe violence in service to Trump is above the law.
We should all be terrified.
Since January 6th, Donald Trump has only intensified his attacks on America's fundamental democratic institutions. He has weaponized our justice system to reward his allies and punish his enemies. He's pursued policies that prioritize the interests of his wealthy friends over the needs of working people. And he has flouted the system of checks and balances that has been the bedrock of our nation for nearly 250 years. But at a time when it feels our democracy is in peril, Americans of all stripes are coming together to preserve our great experiment. There is an ever-growing coalition of people who are willing to put patriotism above allegiance to any person or party, who share a fundamental commitment to an America by and for the people, where no one is above the law. That's why I'm honored today to introduce three witnesses who have been center to those efforts. Jeff Duncan served in the Georgia House of Representatives from 2013 to 2017, and then as the state's lieutenant governor from 2019 to 2023. As lieutenant governor, Mr. Duncan was instrumental in resisting Trump's pressure campaign to overturn the results of the 2020 election in Georgia. He rebuffed Trump's bogus calls to find 11,780 votes and refused to convene the special legislative session to facilitate Trump's illegal fake elector scheme. Because of his continued refusal to bend the knee to Donald Trump, he was expelled from the Georgia Republican Party. We're also joined by Illinois Attorney General Kwame Raoul. A Chicago native, Attorney General Raoul served in the Illinois State Senate for 14 years before becoming state's Attorney General in 2019. Mr. Raoul has repeatedly and successfully taken the Trump administration to court to combat its unlawful actions, including its efforts to deploy the National Guard in Chicago. Our third and final witness is Skye Perryman. Ms. Perryman is the president and CEO of Democracy Forward, a nonpartisan legal organization dedicated to defending our democracy. Under her leadership, Democracy Forward has led hundreds of legal challenges designed to expand reproductive rights, combat corruption, protect workers, and safeguard Americans' civil liberties. Welcome to our witnesses. Lastly, I'd like to take a moment to note that January 6th isn't the only anniversary of political violence we remember this week. 15 years ago, this Thursday, a gunman opened fire on our former colleague, Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, as she met with constituents outside a supermarket in Tucson, Arizona. 6 people were murdered and 14 injured. Among those killed was Gabriel Zimmerman, a young congressional aide who served as Congresswoman Giffords' community outreach director. A social worker by training, Gabe devoted his life to helping people in his hometown. His decision to enter public service should have been one step in a long and rewarding career. Instead, it made him a target. Democracy demands disagreement, but it cannot abide violence. Civil debate
and disobedience are the American way, the only way. Death and destruction have no place in our politics. Today, as we sit here in the Gabe Zimmerman Memorial Room of the United States Capitol, we remember Gabe's service and sacrifice on behalf of this country, and we commit to honoring him the best way we know how, continuing our work to stem the rising tide of political violence in America. Our democracy depends on it. Thank you, and I yield back to Chairman Thompson.
Thank you so much, Mr. Aguilar. I'll now recognize our witnesses, each for 5 minutes, to provide summaries of their testimony. Their full written remarks will be submitted for the record. Lieutenant Governor Duncan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee for inviting me here today to testify. I want to start my comments by restating the obvious. Donald Trump's attempt to overturn the 2020 election was not about validating an election, but instead was a series of organized and unlawful acts meant to upend the democratic process through any means necessary. In 2020, Donald Trump lost the election in Georgia by more than 11,000 votes, and he immediately launched a pressure campaign trying to get elected officials from all around the state to overturn the election. At the time, I was a Republican, but there was no way I was going to illegally throw out millions of votes in our state. So within hours of the polls closing and Donald Trump started spreading lies, I stood up to him. And make no mistake about it, it's instantly put a target on my back. Our families had fully armed State Patrol officers positioned outside our house because our family received death threats virtually every time Donald Trump went to Twitter and lied about me. We were harassed by MAGA disciples almost everywhere we went out in public. Our kids got picked on in school. The list goes on and on and on, all because I was telling the truth. I'm often asked, why'd you do it, Jeff? Why did you stand up against a sitting president? Why did you take on an entire political party? It's in that moment I was reminded of our family motto, doing the right thing will never be the wrong thing. In the immediate aftermath of the 2020 election, it was a very difficult time for my family, as you can imagine, between the threats and the constant harassment. In the depths of that terrible moment in time for our family, one of my 3 sons came downstairs and reminded me of our family motto. Hey, Dad, doing the right thing will never be the wrong thing. Stay strong. That gave me the courage to stand up and to keep moving. Doing the right thing is why I endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris and spoke at the DNC on her behalf. It's why I campaigned for her in the 2024 election in battleground states all across the country. All because I was bold enough to say out loud that Donald Trump should never be president ever again. And guess what? I was right. It's also why I switched parties. And it's why today I'm grateful to wake up every day as a proud Democrat. When asked by some if I've lost my mind, the answer is no. I found my heart. As a Democrat, I have access to a much improved toolkit to meet the needs of millions of Georgians. I can now talk about things like expanding Medicaid, passing common sense gun legislation, and yes, even repealing Georgia's 6-week abortion ban. Trump's #1 ally in our state is current Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones. Trump said it himself. The New York Times just put out a story with audio where Trump specifically said that Burt Jones is totally on our side, and he is. Burt Jones was a fake elector and tried to call for a special session to try to steal the election on behalf of Donald Trump. He tried to rally troops with lies and conspiracy theories, and that's exactly why I fired him as the chairman of the insurance committee when I was lieutenant governor. When he was sitting in my office and asked why, I said, if you're willing to lie about an election, how can Georgians trust you to chair a committee as important as this? It's this willingness to put Trump above all else that is the fundamental difference, not only between myself and Burt Jones, but also between the Trump's Republican Party and the rest of us who believe in service to others above self-interest. Trump is a man-made disaster, and hard-working Americans are paying dearly for it. Georgia, like all states, is in the midst of a crisis like we've never seen before, and we need somebody who has the courage to stand up, not just to only stand up to Donald Trump, but to stand up in this moment for them, their families, and their communities. I've decided to take that challenge, and I'm encouraging millions of Georgians to join me on that journey. It will never be okay for any of us in this room to let the reality of what happened on January 6th give way to the lies, corruption, and violence of Donald Trump's jaded vision of America. It's time we start turning the chaos into conversations in this country. and get back to solving people's real problems instead of creating them. I'm working with a coalition of Georgians ranging from Democrats, independents, and the growing list of disgusted Republicans to continue to fight back against Donald Trump. I implore all of us in this room and across the country to do the same. It's time for all of us to stand up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The gentleman yield back. I will yield to Congressman Garcia to introduce the next witness if he chooses.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to all the witnesses that have testified and are about to testify. I wasn't meaning to introduce him, but I certainly will, because Attorney General Raul is a longtime friend, former state senator in Illinois, a true public servant, and someone who's distinguishing his office and the people of Illinois by fighting for democracy, by standing up for the Constitution, the rule of law, and of course protecting communities across the state of Illinois. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming the Honorable Kwame Raoul.
Mr. Attorney General, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm honored to testify in front of you this afternoon, and since you gave me a couple of extra minutes, I want to say thank you to Congressman Garcia, who has served the community within Illinois for years, and who's been a friend and a strong advocate on communities who have been under siege. And I would also thank Congresswoman Kelly, as well as former Congressman Kinzinger, both also from Illinois, for their courage. Today, I want to address the work that I and several of my state attorney general colleagues are doing to protect the rule of law. The rule of law isn't an abstract concept. It's the principle that laws are applied in consistent and predictable manner. The rule of law ensures that the Constitution's bedrock principles of separation of powers, state sovereignty, democratic accountability, due process, and equal protection under the law can be relied upon. To protect the rule of law in 2025, I collaborated with other state attorneys general to file 48 lawsuits and more than 100 amicus briefs. Those lawsuits have successfully addressed dozens of issues, including education and the environment, privacy and public health, birthright citizenship and terrorists, and state sovereignty and public safety. One particularly critical example of executive overreach and the need to protect the rule of law has been the President's efforts to federalize and deploy the Illinois and Texas National Guards into Illinois over our state's strong objection. Let me be clear, the American people, regardless of where they reside, should not live under the threat of occupation by the United States military, particularly for the reason that their city or state leadership has fallen out of the President's favor. With regard to deploying the National Guard, a president cannot go beyond the authority granted by Congress, consistent with the Militia Clause of the United States Constitution. In addition, the Posse Comitatus Act prohibits members of the military from engaging in civilian law enforcement activities. There has been no emergency requiring a militarized response in Chicago or anywhere else in the state of Illinois. Since our country's founding, protecting against precisely this threat has been at the core of creating constitutional protections against executive overreach. Alexander Hamilton stated in the Federalist Paper 29 that just the suggestion that one state's militia could be sent to another state for the purpose of political retribution was inflammatory, and that it is impossible to believe that a president would employ such preposterous means to accomplish their designs. Yet, that is exactly what President Trump did. This is an extraordinary moment in American history. My office immediately filed suit to stop the president's unlawful and autocratic actions. Within days, we won a temporary restraining order in the district court. And 2 weeks ago, after considering our respective briefs, the Supreme Court in the 6-3 ruling agreed with us. In its decision, the Supreme Court recognized that deployment of the military to execute the laws is exceptional and held that the government has failed to identify a source of authority that would allow the military to execute the laws in Illinois. This decision was not only important to those of us in the state of Illinois, but to those in California, Oregon, and throughout our nation. I and my partner, state attorneys general, remain unafraid to defend the rule of law for all of the American people. Thank you for inviting me to speak today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Ms. Perriman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for convening this hearing today. We've heard throughout the day about the horrific acts of January 6, 2021, and so today I'm going to focus on the aftermath and what we can all do to respond. In the months following January 6, 2021, the United States was added to a list of global backsliding democracies by the International Institute of Democracy and Electoral Assistance. And our nation has remained on that list every year since. That already concerning backslide has become accelerated and rapidly accelerated over the past 11 or so months as the President and his allies in this Congress have sought to govern in a way that is on a collision course with the United States Constitution. The President has sought to usurp the power of this Congress through impounding funds, through removing a head of state without notification or authorization from Congress, and blatantly dismantling agencies across the federal government that Congress has sought and created to serve people. The Department of Justice has become politicized, aiding and abetting the types of conduct that we saw on January 6th. And there are reports now of scores of cases where the Department of Justice is providing false and incorrect information to federal courts across the country. The President has sought to enrich himself and his friends and allies while people in this country have no health care and are struggling to make ends meet. The President and his allies in Congress are seeking to undermine the ability of people to vote in our free and fair election system. And all of this is happening while on a near daily basis, we at Democracy Forward and so many lawyers across the country are having to go to court every single day to defend the rights of people, whether under the First Amendment, the Due Process Clause, or the Equal Protection Clause of our Constitution from the President's attacks. The threats to our democracy that many of you experienced on January 6, 2021 are now on a national and global stage because of the President and his allies' approach to governing. And it is all the more ironic that this is happening on the 250th year where we will celebrate the anniversary of this country declaring its independence from a king. But yet there is another part of this story that we have been honored at Democracy Forward to see every single day in communities across the country. And that is as powerful institutions have pulled back or decided they're going to sit on the sidelines and succumb to the President's intimidation tactics, we have seen the American people all across the country step forward. As the President and his allies tried to intimidate Americans for peacefully using their voices in protest of this administration's excesses, as he tried to intimidate people for peacefully declaring the most American slogan I can think of, "No Kings," millions of people took to the streets in the largest peaceful mobilization of United States citizens in this country's history last year, unintimidated by the President. It's a stroke of dark irony that as this President would pardon violent rioters and insurrections, he would have the audacity to call the American people across this country un-American for saying something like "No Kings." Over the past 11 months, there have been more than 500 federal court cases filed by people in communities, attorneys general, and members of civil society across this country seeking to defend people's rights. And the people are winning. They're winning in courts with judges that were appointed by President Trump himself, judges appointed by Republican presidents, and judges appointed by Democratic presidents. And they are winning notwithstanding that the president continues to intimidate and seek to threaten lower court judges, as well as lawyers bringing these cases. Civil servants, the individuals who serve our government regardless of who is in power, those civil servants that the president has sought to fire or undermine in their jobs, they're still working for the American people. At Democracy Forward, a number of civil servants are former civil servants who have been fired by the president are putting their expertise to work to be able to plan for a government that someday will listen to and deliver for the people, unlike this administration, through our Democracy Works 250 program. And across the nation, we have seen people of all ideological and political backgrounds join together in defense of our democracy and in defense of non-negotiable principles behind our democracy as part of a We Hold These Truths initiative that launched on July 4th last year. Today, we are launching a pledge during this 250th anniversary of the United States, this anniversary year, and on the anniversary of January 6th, for all Americans to show their support around the 5 principles, non-negotiable principles of American democracy. That's voting in elections, equality, due process, personal freedom, and the rule of law.